Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 37 and if you're new here, don't worry, I will link the playlist at the top of the screen so that you can watch any of the videos in this series that you want to. We're making a quilt on a garden theme and we mostly make one block a week, and this week we are going to make a block that joins to one that we made a few weeks ago, our brimstone butterfly. So if you didn't see that video, we made a set of 4 quilted wings and then we made a trapunto body and added some little embroidery details to create the flight path and the antenna. And you can get the template for this from our website for just £1, and I'll put a link in the description below. So I'm starting with my backing fabric. I'm using my 5mm green stripe, and this is a piece cut 20 by 20 centimetres. I've also got some scraps of some of the other fabrics that I've been using across my quilts. I've got my red stripe, my blue floral and a pale blue. I've obviously got my brimstone butterfly block with the seam allowances marked. I've got some bonder web, my embroidery and fabric scissors, and I've got a heat erase pen and a pencil, and I've got my circle templates and some machine cotton. And I've also got just a few threads for this week. These are all Anchor brands, so I've got my dark green, which is 683, my yellow, which is 298, my red, which is 046, and my blue, which is 130. I tend to use Anchor, but do feel free to substitute for a brand of your choice. Now I've marked a 1cm seam allowance on the back at the top of my block, and I've also marked in the points where the side seam allowances are going to cross over that, just so that I've got a marker to show where I'm going to join my next block on. And we're going to start by putting these together. So to make sure I don't make mistakes, I lay them out in the order they're going to appear on the quilt and then book fold them together, and that way I make sure everything is going to finish up as it should be. Then I'm going to put a pin through the corner points on both blocks. I'm starting with the left corner, so I find the corner point on my butterfly block and make sure my pin goes through right at that point. And then I find the corner point on my new block and put a pin through there, and then I'm just going to lift it up by the pins and give it a little bit of a shake just to make sure they are aligned. And that means that now my seam allowances should match up on the 2 blocks. You can see the blue is a little bit short there. There was quite a lot of distortion in this block, so I've made a seam allowance that compensates for that. And if you're not sure how to do that, I will link a video at the top of the screen that shows that process. I've just got some machine cotton and a normal sharps needle, and I'm going to backstitch these 2 blocks together. So I'm going to come up from the back a little way in from the edge of my block, and I'm going to go back towards the edge 1 stitch length. Then I rock my needle forward along that seam allowance line to 1 stitch length beyond my starting point to leave a gap. So I've got my thread, a gap, and then my first stitch, and I make my next stitch back up against that first stitch. Then I rock forward again a stitch length beyond my next stitch and then go back to where that stitch ended, rock forward and go back, and then rock forward and then go back, and that's why it's called backstitch. And I'm going to work my way along the seam allowance line in that way, keeping my stitches quite small and close together. So I backstitched all the way along. I just want to press that seam open, so I brought in my ironing pad. I want to press these to the blue fabric because that's the darker of the 2, and you can see me there just pulling gently on the blue so that that seam stretches out and I don't fold a pleat into my blocks. And I'm pressing that from the back and then again from the front. You might be able to see I've got some loose threads there that have come through. I can just trim those off, it's fine. So now I'm going to mark my block. I've got my heat erase pen and I want to carry on my flight path first of all. So I'm just freehanding this and making lots of loops and curls as I go across my block, and it's up to you. You could make your flight path go out at the bottom of the block. I'm going to go out at the side, and I'm just going to make those lines a little bit darker by sketching over them again. This is going to go next to a block that has a quote from Christina Rossetti on it. We made a block that had the quote, "Hurt no living thing," and I'm going to continue the lines of that poem. So I'm just going to freehand the words ladybird, nor butterfly, nor moth with dusty wing onto this block, and that's the next line of her poem. And then finally, I'm going to mark some circles. We're going to put some of the motifs that we've used elsewhere on the quilt on this block. So I just want a largish circle, a medium and a small. And I'm going to make one of them overlap the join between these two blocks. So I'm just popping a circle that's halfway across the blocks. And our embroidery is going to start with our darkest green. So I've got 2 strands here in my needle, and let's start with the easiest bit, which is running stitching along the flight path line. So I'm just bringing my needle up from the back, and I want this to look like the running stitch from that top block is just carrying on. So make sure you leave a space between the last stitch on your butterfly block and the first stitch on your knee block. And running stitch is really easy. It's just taking your needle up from the back, moving along a bit and going back down through the fabric, then leaving a little space and coming up again, and then moving along and going back down. And I always think that running stitch looks most professional when the spaces between the stitches are smaller than the stitches themselves. So I'm just working my way along that line, just turning my work as I go to make sure that it's comfortable to stitch and that my stitches aren't twisted. I do find that if you twist your hand, your stitches will end up not following the line. They'll be at jaunty angles all the way along. So do turn your work and make sure it's easy for you. So I've stitched in that flight path now, and we're going to add in our lettering. So again, I've got 2 strands of my darkest green, and I'm going to use a whipped back stitch for this. So I'm coming up just above the bottom of the line for the L and working back down towards the bottom of the line. Then I come up a stitch length beyond that stitch and work back to the end of my first stitch. Then I come up a stitch length beyond my next stitch and then work back to the previous stitch, and then I can come up at the very end of the line and go back to the previous stitch. So that's how we would backstitch the letters, and you could just leave it at that, but I really like whipped backstitch. It gives a more defined and slightly raised line. So now to add the whipping, I'm going to come back up at the very top of the letter, and I want to slide my needle under each stitch, and it's really important that you always go in the same direction. So I'm going right to left here as I work my way down the letter, and I'm not passing through the fabric here, I'm just sliding underneath the stitches that I've made. So that's my 4th stitch, and then when I get to the bottom of the letter, I can take my needle back through to the back and then come up ready to start my next letter. So to do a circular letter, again I'm going to backstitch around. I'm starting with the curve. So try and keep your angles nice and shallow so that it doesn't look pointy. It is worth taking your time over this because this is going to be your lettering forever on this quilt, so you want to make it nice. on the inside of the top of the curve. And when you're working a curve, it's hard to remember which way's left and which way's right, because obviously you're changing direction. So I like to think about it as going from the inside to the outside of the letter, and that keeps me heading in the same direction. So I'm just going to work all those letters in the same way, and then we'll come back. So here's my lettering all put in, looking nice and bold. I haven't ironed it yet because I don't want to erase my circles, so that's why it might look a bit hazy, because I've got the lettering that I drew on. And now I'm going to work on my circles. So I'm drawing them onto the paper side of some Bondweb, and you can see me there numbering the circles on my Bondweb and on my fabric so that I remember which one goes where. I'm going to roughly cut those out with my paper scissors, and I'll just do one at a time just to show you, just laying on my other circles, the ones that I want on red spot fabric. I actually messed this up, so I was trying to save time and ended up taking much longer. But you lay your Bondweb pieces on the back of your fabric, glue side down, and then press and iron over the top and hold for about 10 seconds. When that's cooled down, you can then cut out your shapes precisely. As I say every time we're cutting circles, it's always better to turn your fabric and not your scissors. You get a much smoother line that way and much more control. Then I'm going to peel the paper backing off my shape and put it glue side down onto my backing fabric, and then press that again with an iron, holding the iron in place for about 10 seconds, and that remelts the glue and fuses it to your backing fabric. I'm going to make 3 circles for each flower, and I'm going to make sure each flower has all 3 fabrics. So I've got a large, medium and a small circle there, and I'm offsetting them from the centre just in the way that we've done in our previous Scrappy Flowers videos. So now I'm going to add some embroidery, because if you've been here for a while you'll know that I don't fully trust Bondweb to stay in place forever. So I'm adding some elongated chain stitches here. I'm using 2 strands of yellow thread. I've brought my needle up, looped it round and taken it back down in the same place that the thread came up, and that creates a little loop. Then I've brought my needle back up inside that loop and put in an anchor stitch, extending it out down into the centre of the flower. So again, make a little loop, needle back down where it came up and rock it forward inside the loop, and then take your needle back down further into the flower to add that stalk. I'm starting these stitches just outside the outer circle, and I'm making sure my chain stitch rocks back and comes up inside the outer circle, so inside that blue floral, and then my stalk goes down just on the red fabric just outside that pale blue centre. And I'm going to work my way all the way around that flower, making sure my stitches angle slightly each time so they look like they're radiating out. I've got 2 strands of my blue thread here, and I'm going to put in some pistol stitches now in between each of those yellow chain stitches. So to make a pistol stitch, I'm going to bring my needle up on the pale blue centre of the flower. I'm going to hold my thread taut and wrap it over my needle 3 times, and then take my needle back down on the blue floral fabric, the largest outer circle of the flower. Then I can just bring my needle up again on the pale blue, it's just inside the pale blue there, and then take my needle back down on the mid blue outer circle. And the process of doing this is going to obviously add some embroidered embellishments, but it's also making sure that there are several stitches holding each layer of fabric down, so that should our Bondweb fail in the future with use and washing, our flowers are going to stay in place. So the last thing I'm going to add to my flower is some straight stitches at the middle. I've got 2 strands of red thread here, and again I'm just going to work my way around, putting a straight stitch in between each of my pistol stitches and making sure I'm angling my stitches so that they look like they're radiating out from the centre of the flower. So that's my stitch flower. I'm going to repeat that with the other 2. So here's our finished block. We've got our flight path, our Christina Rossetti quote, and our 3 scrappy flowers that are echoing our previous blocks, and we've attached it to our brimstone butterfly. I'll just flip it this way so that I can fit it all onto the screen. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It's a fairly simple block this week, but it's a great one for bringing our finished quilt together using motifs and ideas from other blocks that we've done. Can't wait to see your versions. Please do share your creations at #FSH23quilt. That way we can see everybody's quote and Scrappy Flowers blocks together. If you have enjoyed this, I will link some similar videos over here, and if you're enjoying our content and want to join our little Feather Stitch House community, you can click on our logo down here. Makes it really easy for you to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week making your quote and Scrappy Flowers block, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!